Welcome back to Meta Motivation Monday with the master of the metaverse. I am your host, good old Graybeard. First time viewers, don't miss out. Leave me a like, leave me a comment, and please share with your friends, family, and neighbors. And please help me pay it forward. Here at the Master of the Metaverse, we're basically talking about the transition between Web 2.0 moving on to Web 3. Okay, now that's what we're doing. We're trying to understand, we're trying to dig in and figure out what this means. Okay, but the foundation of the Web 3 community is decentralization and data ownership. Okay, a lot of people believe that the metaverse right now is just the experience of virtual reality with some type of goggles. Okay, and real smart glasses, Apple, whatever. Okay, but uh, it's not entirely true. Okay, these are closed metaverses that just offer an experiences. They do not support decentralization. For example, Facebook. Facebook is going to offer you this amazing opportunity to go into the metaverse, education, whatever, training, fitness, but they're going to control all of that data just like they do now. Okay, so we need to look back into this. We need to look back into companies like Twitter and Facebook who have proven to us that they are doing things with our data. Okay, right now, okay, never mind balloons in the sky or the former president being indicted. No one's talking about Twitter being investigated right now for what they had done with all of our data. And so I'm just stressing here on my channel that we pay attention to all of this. Okay, now I'm not going to get too serious here. Today we want to talk about uh, what this means. Like I said, the foundation of the metaverse is not just this awesome, cool experience. The foundation of the metaverse is decentralization. And so what I want to show you guys today is what it means to be part of a DAO. What is a DAO? Is a decentralized autonomous organization. We're going to go into we're going to go through one of my pillars here where we're going to share this with you today is with blockchain gaming. Good old Graybeard here is working with Gala and Star Atlas, and I'm going to use these platforms to show you what a DAO is. Okay, you can find decentralized organizations amongst any other cryptos, but it's very, very similar to having a share, also having voting power. So it's very, very similar within the crypto space, okay, and the metaverse space. All right, so here we go. I'm going to quit yapping. Let's move on over to Star Atlas, a blockchain metaverse game, a virtual economy game that good old Graybeard is all about. Like I said, very soon here, I'm going to be Sergeant Stelter. Don't trip. Star Atlas, a grand strategy game of space exploration, territorial conquest, political domination, and more. So it's just a game, right? I don't know, but to warm you guys up, let's watch the trailer. Yeah.
Miles, the station reported a distress signal last night. They think it came from your dad's ship.
The signal, it came from past the outer ring. How is that even possible?
His ship has been reported missing for 20 years now. Pretty sure he's not coming back.
We go there, we might not come back.
What is this place?
This is going to change everything. They found out we have the map. They're gonna kill us for it.
If that's the case, there's only one thing we can do.
Holy moly. Okay, here we go. So here we go. Here is our entrance to the DAO governance room, okay? The DAO is the ultimate political power in Star Atlas. Participate in governance and steer the future direction of the galaxy. Bing, bang, boom. What is the Star Atlas DAO? The Star Atlas DAO is your opportunity to influence the destiny of every aspect of Star Atlas. The long-term vision of Star Atlas is an autonomous player-owned game, fully controlled and funded by decentralized governance. Okay, how does the DAO work? Utilizing multi-signature wallets and on-chain proposal voting, members decide economic and political control of the entire Star Atlas metaverse. Decentralized Autonomous Organization, or DAO, are member-owned governance organizations whose actions are programmatically determined by on-chain consensus mechanisms. The Star Atlas ecosystem is guided by the DAO with governance for player guilds, regional, factional authority, and ultimately the future of all its citizens. Wow. So like I said, it's very similar to owning a share for these companies, but also but like I said, cryptocurrency is moving in the same direction with decentralized autonomous organization. Okay, so very, very, very exciting stuff. Now we're going to get into the details of what exactly this means and how we do this. Obviously, we're working with currency here, right? And so with this cryptocurrency, are we just going to hold it and not do anything with it? Okay, and just sit there and play with it? No, I decided with Star Atlas that I'm going to actually spend the money and use the money and find utility. I'm on my way. Don't trip. Turtles win the race, and I'm a Ninja Turtle. Okay, so this is the Star Atlas platform. Okay, this is one of the communities that I am part of, that I'm going to continue to be a part of and grow with, just like many kids did with Roblox. Good old Graybeard is going to grow with Star Atlas. Okay, just another example, another platform is Gala Games. This is going to be one of the mainstream ones, but they have something called player nodes. The decentralized Gala Games ecosystem aspires to blow the doors wide open and give players back the control they deserve. Through decentralization, players not only own their in-game items, but they have a voice in how the Gala Games roadmap develops. Players and node owners will be enlisted via distributing voting mechanisms to help determine what games should be added to the platform or what should be funded by the decentralized Gala Games ecosystem. Excellent. So, believe you me, not letting all my tricks out the bag, but I have the system to obtain a Gala node. That's going to be my next purchase. Never mind. Powered by the people. Everything within the Gala Games network depends on the player-owned node ecosystem. The Gala network is supported by users just like you who operate Gala nodes from their home computers. So it's another example of a decentralized, autonomous organization. All right, I hope you guys are picking up. I hope you guys are following. I don't have any live viewers yet. I got nobody chatting with me yet. Hence the word yet. Okay, don't worry. Okay, I know this is crazy. I'm gonna go ahead and take you over to my new hero. Okay, Yat Sui is the CEO and founder of a company called Animoca Brands. Now, the reason why I like him is because he obviously he was into this game much further than I was. I'm gonna do much more research on this company, but I have to play you guys this video after the theme today of DAO and data ownership. This man has just been on point, and I'm just going to shut up and let him take the show.
You're really an early mover in using NFTs in the gaming industry, and a lot of your games, specifically the metaverse ones, focus on the idea of virtual land ownership. The Sandbox, the obvious example. How do you see that evolving?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why we were so drawn to NFTs is because anyone who's a gamer will appreciate the fact that the virtual items that they have inside games is one that they feel they should own already. Most gamers don't realize that actually all the items that they apparently play with and have earned, whether they paid money for it or earned it through gameplay, actually it doesn't belong to them. The terms of service makes it very clear that it belongs to the game company. I bought my first virtual item I think maybe 30 years ago or so in a multi-user dungeon. I paid $20 for it. And it was one of those interesting experiences where for me it was as real as anything else. And I think today that is true probably for the 3.2 billion gamers out there. Everyone believes that they ought to own their virtual items. Now, whether they understand it or not is a different matter altogether. But intrinsically, they believe they should own it, and the gamers themselves around their communities believe they should own it too.
Okay, well, we're talking about ownership. If you own an actual home and you have the deed to that property, there's obvious utility and value in owning a home. It can be, close to your office, close to your child's school. You have a kitchen you can cook in. It's shelter. It protects you from the rain. What gives virtual land value? Why is it intrinsically valuable and digital property rights important by extension?
Well, let me just sort of illustrate another example, and then we can go straight into virtual land and the network effects implied with it. In general, when we think of as a species, when we think about when we purchase something, we don't just purchase something for its pure utility. There is a value in that, of course, but there's a lot that goes into social identity and social statuses as well. So for instance, when you buy a Birkin bag, how much of that sort of Birkin bag in value is the material quality around it? And in fact, 99.9% is entirely virtual in construct.
You just want to be seen with your Birkin bag.
Exactly. The network effect, that's right.
Yeah.
But it's also what other people say about it. It's sort of that feeling of being part of a community as well, of other people who have Birkin bags. Now, real estate functions in much the same way. Why would you want to live in Tribeca versus some place far away in Africa? Technically speaking, that house that you have can be bigger and larger and perhaps, more majestic in another place, another country. But we want to live in New York. Again, it's because of the network effect. It's because of the people around. It's the influence that comes with it. And just in that same way, when people ask you where you're from, they're not asking specifically, or even maybe which district you live in, for instance, where do you live? It's a very common question. It's not that they're necessarily just trying to size you up. They're trying to understand what community you're in as well, right? So, you live in the Peak, or you're that kind of person, or you live in Tribeca, or you live in Brooklyn, right? These are parts of identifying who you are. And we choose to play and live in these places as a way of identifying us. And so people do this in virtual worlds as well. When you say what games you play, for instance, actually you're saying what kind of a gamer you are, what kind of a community you're part of. And virtual land in the sandbox functions exactly the same way. The difference about why virtual land and sandbox has meaning is because you now actually have real ownership. And that's a real big difference because, if you don't actually have ownership, you can't allow for capital formation. You can't also allow for the ability for third-party network effects to take place in a permissionless manner. The fact that I can own a house in the real world, for instance, is the reason why a bank can give me a 20 or 30-year mortgage. Now, for digital assets, that wasn't possible until you have blockchain, where at least, someone can now say, well, I know you own this asset. Whatever that may be worth, I can give you the benefit of that capital formation, whether this generates yield, and therefore I can do a 20 or 30-year forward, or whatever that is that I can construct. And it may not be one-to-one how it is in the physical world, but I can now do that because I have the certainty of ownership.
Okay, so obviously there's the context of gaming, and I know the next panel is going to focus a lot on gaming, and I don't want to eat up too much of what they're going to talk about. But as you talk about kind of the idea of just digital property rights, obviously that goes well beyond the gaming sphere. That is everywhere. And I'm just wondering if you feel that that has developed enough, that there is enough structure around the idea of owning digital property at this point.
Well, I think owning digital property is a relatively novel concept still. So I go to this concept around sort of what do we think is natural to us, as in like natural rights, right? And I think that certainly for gamers, the idea that you should own your sort of game items feels natural to them. And for the communities around them, it feels natural too. So it is essentially an implied right, although technically speaking, because data, which is the construct in which is created and formed, doesn't have a sort of legal construct. It's therefore a terms of service, right? It's basically under contract law, which technically means that they can take away, basically all your data rights just because you signed on a click-through agreement, which we think in and of itself is wrong. And I think this is the main thing that we need people to understand. That data is actually the natural resource of this metaverse, of Web3. And data is the valuable commodity in this place. When you think about 20, 30 years ago, when the internet came around, we were able to fairly price commodities in places like China or Vietnam or other places because people knew what the fair value was that commodity was paid for. a farmer in China could charge a fair price of rice, knowing that his rice was now sold for a certain value because the internet told him what the value was. The problem with data is we don't notice. The fact that we're all spending time on Facebook and Instagram, where there's no ticker next to us that says, today, your time earned you $50 or earned Facebook $50. We can maybe make an assumption, but we don't really know. Now, what does your relationship to your platform change when you realize how much money they're actually making from you? And they don't tell you this intentionally because it's to their benefit. It's a classic kind of arbitrage, except it's a different kind of knowledge arbitrage based on the data and the network effects that it can create. So property rights in data changes this, because in the same way that you can't send someone to slavery, for instance, right? You can't ask someone to work for free for you. And we think of the world, everyone who plays games, for instance, or everyone who spends time on Facebook, we think of them as working essentially for free, because they add to the network effect. After all, if we all stop using Facebook or we all stop playing sort of, Fortnite, for instance, actually the value of the game plummets to zero.
Right, nothing is ever actually free in full
Correct.
free terms, and we've definitely
That's
learned
right.
that with free trading, for example. We know how that has played out over the course of the meme stock era over the last several years. As we talk about property, of course, it's not just virtual land or physical land, whatever. There's also intellectual property rights. And I know that you have been making some investments as well into things like education and NFTs. How do you tie those two things together?
So education is something that's very dear to us. Part of the reason, and we've seen this with gamer time and gamers as well, it's about value to society. One may argue about sort of what is gamers' value to society. We don't have to go into this now. We do think it's very valuable. But for teachers, I think it's undeniable. Everyone agrees that teachers are very valuable to society, except they're amongst the least paid in society. So there's a little bit of a sort of disconnect here. And one of the reasons we think that's the case is because it's not been possible for them to have the benefits of the classic capital formations that you can have with property rights. Now, what we've seen with non-fungible tokens is that content turns into assets, and that makes them platforms, right? That's basically sort of the general thesis. Now, if you actually have a teaching content, and TinyTap, which was an acquisition we recently did, is the largest mobile teacher marketplace, serving about 8.6 million families today. And what's interesting about that is that teachers make about $100 a year, maybe $1,000 a year. Some teachers make tens of thousands, but that's a very small number. And it's basically based on the fact that people are sort of using the content, whether it's a parent or another teacher that's purchasing it. Now imagine that you turn this into effectively a yield instrument where I can buy this piece of content that a teacher can make $1,000 a year, and I'm happy to accept a 10% yield. Actually, that teaching content is now worth $10,000. And it's a very different factor in your life when a teacher, adds $1,000 of supplemental income a year, or he makes tens of thousands of dollars selling his content.
I'm sorry. I had to stop that real quick. I might have to go change my shorts. Okay, are you guys listening to what he is saying? Education, NFTs. Now teachers are going to find a new way to get paid and not have to worry about the state curriculum. It falls in line with what we talked about last week with education, right? Holy moly. Wow. Okay, leakage. All right, I'm sorry. My bad. Okay.
As an asset. And that's what we've seen already with NFT artists, for instance. That's what happened there as well. But with teachers, we think it could be even bigger because teachers are amongst the biggest content creators in the world. And we also see another benefit here, which is that we can now sort of provide sort of financial value to teachers and to educators around the world, not in a manner that is purely sort of from a charity standpoint, but actually as a working business model where I can invest in a teacher and it can benefit them as well. I think this is something that we're really excited about.
What else are you excited about? Are there any, similar opportunities that you see out there where you're like, hey, I can use monetization of these assets that already exist, make them a non-fungible token, we can have a mutual benefit here? I mean, what other opportunities like that are you looking to pursue?
Well, there's so many, but I mean, I would say, given the time, one of the opportunities
Top two, maybe.
Yeah.
30 seconds each.
Yeah. Well, so the very first one that I'm really excited about is what it means for children's education in terms of financial systems and economic systems. When you engage things like digital property rights at a young age, where they have to trade or they understand about money and value, if we can teach our children algebra, we can certainly teach them economics, I would think. But the problem is that we don't teach them anything on this until they go to college, and they typically have debt. And their first experience with financial systems is owing money, essentially a form of quasi-indentured servitude. So our perspective on this is actually, if we teach our children about money and systems at a young age, whether it's through games or other things with digital property rights, we will actually create an entire generation of children who understand about financial systems, who understand about risk, who understand about money, and it will be very different. They can't be exploited the same way with credit cards and so on. They'll be more careful. They understand interest rates, right? These are aspects that we think will actually change the world in a very significant manner. If you take a look at what happened with Axie Infinity, for instance, you've got millions of people in the Philippines. None of them are university educated, right? And actually understanding how a financial system in a game works, for instance, having essentially a crypto wallet instead of a credit card, primarily because they weren't even allowed to have a credit card because it was financially not viable for them to do so. Broadly speaking, anything that makes content, which is really our human imagination, has now the ability to become an asset, right? Through non-fungible tokens. And everything that is an asset becomes a platform, right? In the same way that ownership of physical assets in the real world allow us to basically create new services on top of this in a permissionless fashion. So, whether this is music, film, entertainment, writing, all these areas that have barely been touched in terms of creating those forms of content into assets, this is all open, right? So platforms like Sandbox create the first wave into that. Land ownership is one element of it, but it's content creators that are using Sandbox as a platform to do that, right? Not that different from, I'm basically launching something on Fifth Avenue as a way to sort of launch my services to the world. That's the first part, but eventually this will just mushroom to the rest of to a global phenomenon, we believe.
All right, so you've talked a lot about network effects and kind of these communities, and I want to get to DAOs because this was an actual real moment on one of my shows earlier today. Someone said, a fellow anchor, I was talking about a cryptocurrency stock that was rising. He's like, is it in the DAO? And I'm like, which DAO? He was like, the DAO. And I was like a decentralized autonomous org. He was like, no, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So that was a nice, they sound the same. It's confusing. But how do you see that fitting into the work you are doing and that particular method of organizing evolving?
So our general perspective on DAOs is that and we're really excited about this because it provides a way for democracy and democratic systems to evolve, but at the pace of technology. When you start experimenting with sort of democratic systems, which is what a DAO really is, it can have very disastrous effects if you do this in the running of a country and you have to experiment, and you can't really do the sort of MVP DAO approaches on an actual government. That would be a problem. But we can learn from this when you use it in virtual systems, whether this is a metaverse, whether it's a running of a token system, whatever that may be. And we see this emerging. You should expect that there's going to be thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of DAOs operating. I also think DAOs could be the future of work and the future of companies as well. Like in the same way that companies are in some cases bigger than countries, I believe DAOs can be bigger than that as well. And the main point of this is that it's community interest. Now, the classic argument has always been, well, if you have consensus by the masses, and how does anything move forward? And is there always people going to argue and nothing happens? Well, I mean, welcome to democracy, right? The one thing about democratic systems is, yes, maybe things don't move as quickly. On the other hand, they have good self-correcting mechanisms, provided that the community has the respective version of a national interest. And that's what we believe will happen. We think that DAOs create a form of micro-communities and micro-nationalism inside these type of ecosystems that are forming. And that, not to say that every DAO will succeed, just like every country doesn't succeed, but the ones that do, the ones that create that common thread, are actually going to be the ones from our perspective, sort of some of the biggest things, because everyone has a stake in it, as opposed to where only a small minority has an interest in it.
All right, we only have about 90 seconds left, and I want to make sure to get to this while talking about democracies. You and I chatted by phone about a week ago, and you were talking about democratic liberalists who are staunchly anti-crypto, and how you kind of see this more broadly as just an outright war on capitalism. Can you just give us your hot take on that?
So, I mean, this was something that I didn't really appreciate it until I was stuck in the US because of COVID. And my strong democratic sort of pro-liberal friends are actually didn't like crypto, and I didn't understand that. I couldn't connect it until I discovered that they didn't like capitalism. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that they don't appreciate that the system of capitalism and democracy might be connected, but that capitalism has, particularly in America, been the source of great injustice and inequity for the last 2 or 3 decades. And so they see this as a problem. They see capitalism as an ultimately only monopolistic outcome, and therefore, needs to be fought against. And so from my perspective, at least from an outsider perspective, I see this essentially as a different kind of war that's taking place, and perhaps maybe even at the heart of some sort of American politics right now around sort of, the perspectives on that. Now, our view on this, though, is, and this is the understanding, crypto, and particularly Web3, actually has very strong anti-monopolistic qualities to it. In fact, the fact that data is an open construct, that you can compose freely on top of it, that you can't have these monopolistic practices is actually of benefit. And I feel like if we can explain that better to them, they'll understand that actually Web3 and crypto is perhaps the answer that they seek, to have both a capitalist system that can also be equitable.
Excuse me. Oh my gosh. I gotta go change my shorts. Guys, they covered. This is why my guy's my new hero. Every time I watch this guy talk, I gotta take a nap afterwards. It's just something that my brain doesn't really compute that easily. Okay, excuse me, but that's why we're diving in and learning this. He covered content creator as a teacher making money with NFTs, the politics of it, with how they see crypto and Web3 a as a form of capitalism, but in fact, with the DAO, it's the exact opposite of what they're saying with that. So, woo! Okay, so anyways, you guys, I gotta end it here. After I watch Tatsu talk, I find out afterwards that I can't talk anymore. So, thank you very much for joining me here, folks. But I believe the metaverse is going to be a collaboration and combination of multiple technologies. Number one, artificial intelligence. Number two, blockchain. And number three, mixed realities. These combinations are going to create other revenue streams, different business opportunities, different ways for us to interact. And like you just heard from my man Tatsu from Animoca Brands, because you can create content, you now have an asset. And because of DAOs and cryptocurrency, you can monetize much better than the current monetary systems. I want to say thank you for joining me. Please leave a like, a comment below if you liked today's video about DAOs. Please leave me a subscribe. That helps me figure out what it is, what information that you guys are seeking, and what you'd like to hear. It helps me make better content in the future. So please leave me a subscribe if you like today's live stream. With that said, peace be the journey, and one love.